stopped falling 3 days ago. I remember because we watched it in silence, through the frosted glass panes of the cabin, as if the storm was some kind of performance meant to distract us from our stomachs turning inside out. The trees outside stood like mourners, gaunt silhouettes against a slate-grey sky, their branches heavy with ice and motionless in the still air. No birds sang. Nothing moved but us. Inside, the floorboards creaked with every shift of our weight, and the walls groaned faintly in the cold, as though the cabin itself disliked having us all inside. There were 5 of us left, down from 9. The others had tried to walk out in different directions. None came back. We hadn't spoken about food in a day and a half. It hung in the air between us, unspoken, like the rot that had started to seep from under the boarded-up root cellar. Something had died down there, though none of us were brave, or perhaps desperate enough to check. The scent was sweet and sickly, warmth clinging to it in a way that turned my stomach, but it whispered to us, that smell, reminding us. We didn't have a working radio, just static. The flare gun had fired, but no one came. What we had was silence, a heavy, muffled, oppressive kind, like wool soaked in water. And with each hour, the silence grew heavier until it pressed into our skin, made our thoughts louder, our breathing suspicious. It felt like the walls were listening, judging. Mara sat by the fire, cross-legged, wrapped in 2 jackets that didn't belong to her. She stared into the weak flames as if they might show her a way out. Her lips were cracked from the cold, and when she touched them, they left tiny smears of blood on her fingertips. She didn't seem to notice. I watched her for hours, fascinated and repelled, wondering what she was thinking. We all wondered that about each other. It was Ben who first said it aloud, not the act itself, just the possibility. "What do we do if no one comes by next week?" he said, voice barely above a whisper, as if even the cabin might recoil from the implications. No one answered for a long time, but we all heard it. The question sank into our bones like the cold, and the silence that followed it wasn't empty. It was full of calculations. Who was weakest? Who had the least chance of surviving? Who would be missed the least? I wanted to believe I was imagining it, that the others weren't thinking what I was thinking. But the way Mara shifted slightly away from Ben, the way Greg suddenly looked up from the firewood he was pretending to chop, we all heard it, and we all understood. The next morning, we found the rabbit traps empty again. Greg's hands trembled as he reset them. He said it was cold, just the cold, but his eyes flicked to each of us as he said it. Mara avoided his gaze. That night, the howling began again. It was always worse in the dark, a sound not quite animal and not quite human, a long, drawn-out wail from somewhere beneath the frozen valley. We'd heard it before, twice maybe, but it was closer now. The firewood popped and someone gasped. It might have been me. Every instinct screamed to run, but there was nowhere to go. Whatever was out there was patient. We were not. I didn't sleep. I don't think any of us did. I heard Greg pacing upstairs and Ben muttering to himself in the kitchen. Mara just sat by the dying fire, her eyes reflecting the flames, empty and far away. The 5th of us was Alice. She hadn't spoken since her brother Kevin vanished in the storm 2 weeks ago. They'd argued. She told him that he was selfish, that he'd never cared about the group. He'd walked into the blizzard without a coat, shouting something about proving himself. She watched him disappear into the white, and when the door slammed shut behind him, she sank to the floor, and didn't move for hours. Now she sat by the window, sketching small circles into the condensation with her finger, over and over, as if trying to tell us something in code. She didn't cry anymore. None of us did. Our bodies were too dry. On the 7th day of the coldest wind, Ben began to ration firewood, said we'd need it to last longer. We all nodded, though each of us quietly stashed a few small logs in our personal corners of the cabin. Trust had melted days ago. Greg had caught Mara staring at him while he slept. She claimed it was the firelight, said she was just watching the shadows. But Greg moved his sleeping bag closer to the door after that, curling toward it like a man preparing to flee. On the 8th day, someone smashed the mirror in the bathroom. No one admitted it, but in the cracked shards, our reflections no longer looked like us. Our eyes were deeper, jaws sharper. We were shrinking, from hunger, from fear, from the knowledge of what had to come next. We began to speak in shorter sentences, whispers and grunts. It was easier that way. Words felt dangerous, like blades. They made things real. That night, we voted. It wasn't official, nothing on paper, just a subtle shift in posture, in glances and tone. A silent agreement that we could not wait for rescue. We had to survive. What if we draw lots? Greg suggested, eyes on the fire. That's murder, Mara said quietly. Ben shook his head. This isn't murder. It's survival. Alice didn't speak. She hadn't looked at any of us in days, just kept drawing those same spirals into the window. I wondered if we were already dead, that maybe the cabin had swallowed us and we were just ghosts haunting our own demise. The next day, Ben made a deck of cards from torn notebook pages. No one stopped him. He wrote numbers on each one with a bit of charcoal from the fire, sat at the table like a dealer in an underground casino, fanning the paper cards out slow, like drama was necessary for this. No one reached for them. There's no other way, Ben said. But there was. Of course, there was. Someone could just suggest a name, point a finger, let the rest nod. But no one wanted the guilt of choosing. In the end, fate would decide, so we could all pretend we were innocent. I didn't want to be the one to choose. I didn't want to draw a card. I didn't want to know who had to die. But eventually, we all sat at that rickety table. Mara went first, her hands trembling as she reached for a card. Then Greg. Then me. Then Ben. Alice didn't reach. She's not playing, Mara said, voice thin as the glass in the frozen window. Ben frowned. We all have to draw. She didn't agree, Greg muttered. She hasn't spoken. I glanced at Alice. Her face was grey, hollow. She hadn't blinked in over a minute. She's not right, Mara added. Ben's hand clenched around his card. Then maybe that's the answer. I looked at the others. Their eyes were shifting, calculating again. Wait, I said. It's not fair. She's grieving. She's not even here right now. Greg nodded slowly. She might not last another day anyway. And there it was, the decision, made not by the cards, but by absence. No one said it aloud, but we all saw it happen. That night, the cabin was silent. I didn't sleep. I lay curled in my coat pretending, listening to their breathing, trying to anticipate if they'd move, if they'd act. I thought about Alice, sitting by the window, unaware she'd been chosen. Then, just before dawn, the howling returned, closer this time, louder. We all sat up. It wasn't outside anymore. It was beneath us, in the cellar. The rotted boards creaked. Something dragged behind them, wet and slow. We froze, every one of us, too afraid to speak. Something scraped up the inside of the basement door. The air turned sour. Mara began to cry. Greg held a knife, shaking so violently I thought he might stab himself by accident. Alice stood. No one stopped her. She walked slowly to the edge of the cellar stairs, her bare feet silent on the wood. "I know what it wants," she said. Her voice broke something in us. It was the first time we'd heard her speak in days, and it came out like gravel and ice. She looked over her shoulder, eyes glassy. "It's not about surviving, not anymore. It's about feeding." She opened the latch. The smell hit us first, then the sound, wet, gurgling hunger. But nothing came out. Alice stepped onto the first stair. "No," Mara whispered, but didn't finish. Alice descended into the dark. Someone, Greg, I think, shut the door behind her. The sound stopped. Silence returned. We didn't speak of the cards again, didn't talk about what she said or what waited below. But the hunger remained, and the firewood ran low, and the storm never truly ended. We'd made a choice. And now we waited to see if it had been enough.